Today is Wednesday, October 23rd. The 2024 Mets season is over. A lot to talk about. Let's get into it.
Shea Station, Jerry and Charlie. Shea Station, Jerry and Charlie. Riding through the airwaves, bringing you the heat. Come on, pull your Mets fans. Now get up out your seat. They're bringing you all things Mets. They're bringing you all things Mets. They're bringing you all things Mets. Now you're listening to Shea Station.
Welcome back to the Shea Station podcast. Thank you for listening. This past month was unbelievable. Before we get into all the Mets stuff, I want to thank the listeners for helping us put forth our best month in show history. Over 300,000 new views on YouTube, 3,000 new subscribers. It's not even counting the stuff on podcast apps. So thank you for coming along the ride with us. Thank you for tuning in every day and living and dying on every pitch of this Mets postseason. It was a lot of fun. And the guy who joined me for many, many, many of those shows, Jerry Blevins, is here with me today. Jerry, how the hell you doing, man?
I'm lovely, man. Thank you. Thank you to the listeners as well. It's so appreciated to be able to, have a reason to get together with my friends Jack behind the scenes. It was a fun run, man. That's for sure. And without the fans, it's not nearly as fun. I promise you that. So thank you guys. But I'm good, man. Enjoying sweater weather here in Ohio. It's perfect.
Must be nice because I'm wearing short sleeves and shorts right now because it's 70 degrees in New York for some reason.
That's sweater weather for me. That's nice little cardigan style.
I run hot.
Love wearing.
Jack's shaking his head too. He runs hot too.
Yeah, well,
that's all right. Give it a couple more weeks.
what happens when you're that manly?
So, yeah, guys, the 2024 season is over. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in. That's the end of the episode. No. A lot to talk about. A very eventful National League Championship Series ends with the Dodgers taking it in 6 games. The Mets competed in some areas, but when they lost pretty bad. It's very clear that this was, point blank, the better team, the team that had the advantage in pretty much every department of the roster. And I still appreciate these boys putting up a fight, but it was pretty clear early on that this was going to be a tough hill to climb, even though this team had a full head of steam. I'm not going to go through, deep game recaps because most of it is the same story. The Dodgers got timely pitching and they got timely hitting, and the Mets simply did not. But I just want to say that I'm proud of these boys. I'm proud of, the run that they went through to get to this point when no one thought they'd get here. I said it in my instant reaction, but I'm going to be watching highlights of this team for the rest of my life, and that's a pretty special feeling. I've already begun circling back on the highlights that I might have missed or stuff that I've forgotten about on this run. But just so much to love about this team going towards a very eventful offseason. There's going to be a lot of work to do. But before we get to that, just, I guess, Jerry, your reflection, your state of reflection on the 2024 Mets.
Yeah, two things. Number one, I do think that the Mets were the better team against the Dodgers.
Wow. Sticking to your guns.
I am. They got outplayed by the Dodgers, clutched basically. I think the starting pitching ran out of steam, which is understandable considering, and I think a little bit of the magic in the clutch hitting ran away, but I still think the Mets were the better team in that series. They just got outplayed, and they got beat. They got their butts kicked. Yeah, but as far as the entire season goes, what a fun season this was. You said it. You're going to be watching highlights of this team for your entire life because there were so many special moments, so many special players, such a magical run. There's going to be some, you're celebrating a team that didn't even win a pennant. What does that say about your organization? That's all bullshit to me because regardless, this was a truly fun season to follow. I mean, as far as how the team played, what bright spots to the future mean, it just felt like a revelation in the sense that this feels like the starting block for the rest of this organization's future, but it also had its own standalone value in the sense that the way they won games, the way they've clawed their way back, the emergence of Francisco Lindor's true leadership value on top of his incredible play, superstars coming up in Mark Vientos, all these things truly came together in what was a super, super fun team to follow. Um, Such an easy team to root for. From a former player's perspective, the product that they put on the field, the grit that they showed, the determination, their ability to bounce back, the way they handled adversity. It's something that I value beyond is kind of the way they handled their business. And then from, a fan's perspective, looking at it at big picture, the way this team and front office and ownership handled some of the adversity in like Jorge Lopez's situation, where they said goodbye to a guy that's still a very quality arm and had some really good outings for the Cubs when he went over there, to the way they handled Daniel Nunez, and they could have sent him down when he deserved to be up. These are things that I highlight as a glimpse of what should be a really, really fun team to root for years to come.
Well put, Jerry. I mean, we watch sports for two reasons. One, to enjoy it, and two, to see our team win. And we got a lot of that this year, and I think that's pretty special. When I first talked about the season right after the loss, I wasn't ready to do the whole, the future's bright, like this is the start of something, all that stuff, because you and I both know, like, it's incredibly hard to get this far in the playoffs. You lived in the playoffs for certain areas of your career, and you can understand how difficult it is to get over the hump, even when your team has all the belief in each other, which this team certainly did. I maintain that I fully thought when the Mets made it into the playoffs that they were going to win the World Series. Even when they were down 3-1, I thought they were going to make the comeback, and I thought they were going to win the World Series, and it didn't happen. But it is very special to have that belief. Like, in prior years, even 2022, when they won 100 games, when they got into the playoffs, I think everyone kind of had a sinking feeling about them, about how it was going to go. And it wasn't the feeling with this team. And that's really special for a fan to capture, because it doesn't always happen, especially in this franchise history. And I loved what you talked about like accountability during the season, not just the talent at play, like Mark Vientos having a breakout, Pete Alonso, another 30 homer season, all that stuff. The management of this team was the best I've seen in over a decade, between Stearns constantly holding his bullpen accountable and trying new things and putting in new pieces, the way they went about the trade deadline. Not all those pieces worked out, but I thought they were very active in trying to put this team in a good position to win. I loved that Steve Cohen was there for every single playoff win. He was always in the scrum, in the celebration. That's really special too. This team is in good hands, and I do think we're going to go through it, but there's going to be a lot of change this offseason. It's going to be a very eventful offseason, which is exciting and also scary. But I'm really glad that these are the people that are making decisions between David Stearns as GM and Carlos Mendoza, who just had an outstanding rookie year. I thought that he really did well in the playoffs. I know there was some controversy with, not hitting Jesse Winker or some bullpen decisions, but for a rookie manager who's been around the game for decades and finally got his first opportunity, I don't think you could have maximized your first opportunity better than what Carlos Mendoza did in his first year as Mets manager.
I completely agree. He was tested a lot. I mean, the way this season started, he didn't point any fingers. He soaked up the blame. He handled himself so well. He put himself out front when the team was struggling and stood there, took all that negative energy on, kept pointing to the future. We got to grind this out. Didn't make excuses. He did everything right this season as far as what you want from a leadership role. Obviously, again, there are questions along the way in a season that goes as long as a baseball season does. There's going to be like, oh, why didn't you do this, do that, whatever the case may be. But from a managerial standpoint, this guy could be one of the greats. Like, you don't get to say that very often. I would lock this guy up forever. I'd be like, this is my manager. Obviously, you're not gonna do a forever contract kind of thing, but this should be a Joe Torre in a Yankees uniform, kind of moment where this guy, he's our guy for a long time. This whatever chemistry they have with the front office and the way he handles the players, he's the perfect conduit between all of the things that it takes to be a leader and a manager. Uh, he is one of the biggest bright spots. Again, we're talking big picture, looking for the future. He was a key piece in how this team handled this entire season. He's going to be a key piece moving forward. And I think Mets fans would agree that they're pretty lucky to have this guy in the blue and orange.
Yeah, I think most Mets fans agree with us, especially with the words you said there. And it's not every day that you hear Gary Cohen, the voice of the New York Mets, say that he's going to go down as one of the great managers of all time. That's after 1 year. And I don't take Gary as a guy that's hyperbolic or reactionary. I think
Exactly.
he means those things. They've had exchanges. So it's got me feeling very optimistic about the future. And Mets fans, before we get into, the offseason and all that stuff, like, really, I know everyone probably is already, it doesn't need to be said, but like, cherish this 2024 season. I know it didn't end the way we thought it would. I know it's not going to be hung up in the rafters for any reason because you don't get a banner for losing in the NLCS. I get all that, but these seasons just don't roll around very often. I feel so lucky that we were back to doing the show again in time for this season because it's one I'm going to remember for a very long time. I mean, on paper, this team had no business being anywhere near the final four of the MLB season. No business whatsoever. This was a team that was a couple outs away from missing the postseason entirely when they almost blew that game against the Braves. These kind of runs just don't happen, and I really think that each and every one of these guys on the 26-man active roster has a lot to be proud about between their postseason performances, their performances down the stretch in September, like Quintana in September with that minuscule ERA, Sean Manaea giving us 7 innings out every time. You know what's a big thing for me? The fact
What's that?
Sean Manaea went out in Game 6 and, not to dance around it, he laid an egg because this is the most innings he's ever thrown ever, all that stuff. And when the fans and the media could have came down on him for his poor performance, everyone didn't. And they're all still talking about how they want Sean Manaea back on this team next year because I think they recognize the effort that went into his season and the growth and transformation of that season. It doesn't come down to just one event. It's a whole 162 and the additional 13 you play in the playoffs. And I think that's really cool that Mets fans can come together and appreciate that type of effort, not just for Manaea, but for everyone who had a pretty tumultuous season. So shout out Mets fans. 2024 was special, and hopefully the years to come will be even more special.
I'm glad you said that. I wanted to show my appreciation for these Mets fans. I was so proud of how they represented themselves, how they represented the fandom of the New York Mets, the way they embraced the team. Again, there's a lot of silliness that goes along with, you're celebrating a team that didn't win, whatever the case may be. I get it. I understand that narrative. We're not in the same position as this year's Phillies team.
Yes.
Fans should be disappointed. The Phillies fans embraced this team, their team. They pushed for them. They had their backs. They fell short, and they're disappointed. I hope we're in that position. But this year, that's not the same narrative. They understood this small piece of the 2024 season of a fandom that's a lifetime of being a New York Mets fan. This fan base embraced their team that they had this year in the perfect way. They stood by. They put pressure on guys when they deserved it. They cheered guys when they deserved it. Like, just a truly amazing showing. One that made me proud to be a former player and a current fan of this game and an analyst. They just showed the world who they are in such a good way because that truly is, such a fun fan base, such a fun team to play for. I was really, really impressed with how the fan base were able to portray themselves. Not that they don't always, but it could have gone anyway. But I think they were understood the assignment of what this team is showing them, and they supported them in the way in such a beautiful way. Part of the reason this season was magical was how this fan base embraced the team when they truly needed it. When Brandon Nimmo called the fans to show up, they showed up because they were begging for a season like this, for moments like this. The players put them in that position, and the fans showed up and did their part. Wonderful season. Yeah, so hats off to these fans.
Well put. Yeah, I mean, the fans got to play a pretty fun role in the season between, even early on, the Lindor standing ovation, Nimmo's call to the fans to pack the house, all the different rallying cries that were powered up by the fans like that. I think it's cool that we all get to play such an integral role to this team's success. Obviously, the play on the field determines everything, but you can play your part by packing the house and making that stadium loud. And when I went to multiple playoff games, you felt the ground shake under you. You felt the ringing in your ears before and after and during the game. The block party on the street was packed to the brim. Like, this was it was a very special month, and I think a sign of things to come for how the Mets will be identified across the league. I do think, a bit of a reflection here. Steve Cohen's been owner of the Mets for 4 years. They've made the playoffs in half of those seasons. I know one of those runs was 3 games long, and it's not something to be proud about. But when you go back and you look at the list of seasons in Mets history, what you'll see is a playoff berth like every 10 years and like a couple winning seasons in between. It's rare that this team has made the playoffs, multiple times in a tight window. In fact, if they make it again next year, it's going to be the first time in team history that they make the playoffs 3 times in 4 years. That has not happened in 60 years, and Steve Cohen has the chance to do that very early on in his tenure. So it's just got me excited about this future. And speaking of the future, the Mets have a ton of work to do this offseason, but it's not in a negative way. It's in a very exciting and advantageous way. You got a lot of guys coming back next year. I don't want to act like this team's going to be completely disbanded. Lindor obviously is here for the foreseeable future. So is Nimmo. Mark Vientos is going to be around, and he looks like a bona fide stud. You have Senga, you have Peterson, Diaz, all these guys. But a lot of the 1-year deals that David Stearns made that we all originally thought, these guys are probably trade deadline guys that we're going to try and maximize, became core pillars of this team and the rallying cries and the mojo that this clubhouse created. A lot of those guys are on the block. And what you said about how proud the players were to be on this team really resonates with their quotes after the Game 6 loss. Half of the quotes I have on our outline sheet going over the free agents are, "I'd love to be back." Jesse Winker said it would be a dream to come back. Like Sean Manaea said, it wouldn't take much for him to come back. And I think that's really cool because when I think of Mets free agents of the past and trade acquisitions and from when I was a kid, most of the guys were excited to get as far away from Citi Field as they could because of the culture and the fan base and where we were at 10 years ago. And these quotes are all the evidence you need that this is a different era of Mets baseball, and it's an exciting one, and it's one that a lot of people both in the organization and outside of the organization probably want to be a part of.
Yeah, I think that's the difference too, is the players during the season saw the culture. And it's so different than years past where it was dysfunctional. This feels like a building block, and I think those players felt that the way the city embraced them, the where the front office handled it, where it was like, oh, are we going to sell? But instead, they went out and made some good trades to support the team. Players understand that, and they feel that. I'm sure they would feel it felt honest. Obviously, they're not going to close the door from a business standpoint, but these guys were for real when they're saying, hey, man, I want to be a part of this future. We got a glimpse of what it's like this year. The magic that we put together, it would be an honor and a blessing to be able to don that uniform for another year at least. So, yeah, things are looking bright from a free agent standpoint. Obviously, there's some huge free agent on the market. one in the name of Juan Soto, if you think about it. There's a big question mark of what you do with Pete Alonso. Do you have a chance? Do you want to bring him back? That kind of thing. Um, Pete Alonso right now feels like Jacob deGrom did at the end of his tenure as a Met. What are they going to do? Do they want to bring him back? That kind of thing. There'll be no hard feelings if Pete dons another uniform, I don't think. But the future is bright for these Mets, and it'll be interesting, fun. I think you said the right word on how they fill out this roster. It's going to be a fun offseason.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a pretty similar situation to 2022, the team that won 101 games. A lot of those guys were impending free agents between Bassett, between Taijuan Walker, between obviously Jacob deGrom. Edwin Diaz was a free agent. Like, there were a lot of Brandon Nimmo was a free agent as well. That front office had a ton on their plate to try and keep that team together. They did for the most part, outside of a couple guys like Bassett, deGrom, and Walker. And that team had a lot of similar characters come back, and they weren't as successful the next year. I'm very, very curious what David Stearns chooses to prioritize. We know how capable he is with digging up stuff on the minor league market, like Jose Iglesias, for example, and also making great value 1 to 2 year signings like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino. What we don't know about David Stearns is how he's going to spend big money, because he's never really had that opportunity before. The Mets are going to have $150 million come off their yearly payroll this offseason. That is a smoking hot amount of money, man. That's more than teams' entire payrolls, multiple teams combined, that the Mets get to add onto their payroll. That's probably going to approach $300 million. And I found this bit from Tim Britton's article for The Athletic, and he did a great job this past week with the offseason coverage. The largest deal that Stearns has ever signed was 4 years and $80 million for Lorenzo Cain for the Brewers, which was a solid deal that helped them get far in the playoffs, but it's basically akin to the Starling Marte deal, which is, a significant contract, but one of the smaller footnotes in the spending that the Mets have done the past few years. So David Stearns is going to have every opportunity in the world to create the roster that he wants to create, almost a blank slate, if you will, with the returning pieces that you're going to get very excited about between Vientos, Lindor, and Nimmo. And you have about a dozen or more Mets that are going to hit the market. And I'm not going to lie to you, Jerry, not all these guys are going to be back. Like, let's accept it for what it is. This team was awesome. They captured lightning in a bottle. They were so easy to root for, so charismatic. The Mets are going to look different next year, and I think that's the first step of accepting what this offseason is going to be.
Yeah, you're right. They're not going to be the same. In years past, there was a lot of pressure to just re-up and put forth the same ball club. You had likable guys that they wanted to bring back, and they're like, yeah, let's just run it back, and it didn't work out great in their favor. I think of our team from 16 to 17. And then 17 to 18, we ran it back, and then everything fell apart, that kind of stuff. There will be huge missing pieces from a very, very good team, but this front office understands, and this coaching staff understands, that there's holes that need to be filled, that the 2025 Mets, they have their own identity that they need to establish, and it doesn't just mean trying to recapture the magic of 24. They're going to try to have their own magic in 25. And that starts with the shape of the roster. Yeah,
I mean, you're not going to be able to force upon the 2024 magic like that. That's part of what makes it special. It happens naturally. It occurs, just naturally throughout the goings of the season. You're not going to be able to just force upon OMG and Grimace and all this stuff onto the 2025 team. They're going to have a different identity. Not saying that that's going to be a less successful one. It could be even more successful, but, prospects are going to get a chance. Like Ronnie Mauricio is going to get a look. Drew Gilbert's probably going to get some sustainable playing time. David Stearns has always carved out opportunities for top prospects. He prioritizes that. It's why Mark Vientos had the season that he did, because he was given ample opportunity to succeed, and he finally was able to. Now, I do think that I look at about half of these impending free agents, and I see a lot that I'd want to be back on the team. So I guess I'll ask you point blank, outside of the Pete Alonso discussion, which I think gets kind of its own category between the money and his history here, the home run record, all that, this past season, all that stuff, who is one guy you would love to see this team bring back as like a top priority for you?
Oh man, there's definitely levels here.
Yeah.
I think Winker and Iglesias are very capable of coming back. I think Winker would be an easy one. I'm not sure if he would accept being a bench piece, which I think he would be.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but if he truly wants to come back, and there'll be plenty of playing time, the way baseball shapes itself out through the season, you got a piece that looks like he's going to be a bench piece, then stuff opens up like a Marte injury or whatever the case may be, and then you have those guys step in. Iglesias would be an interesting one because
Yeah.
of the season he put forth. Curious to see what other teams think of his success. Obviously, you can't expect him to have the season he had last year. But I could see them bringing him back. It's going to be difficult, like you said, with Mauricio, with Brett Beatty. What do you do with him? There's going to be Luis Angel Acuna. Do you see him moving around? The difference being young guys like that, you want to have regular at-bats. If Jose Iglesias comes back and he's a bench piece, that's a lot easier pill to swallow, understanding that you're not stunting the development of someone else. So those are two guys I could see coming back. Sean Manaea, for me, is the biggest question mark. I'll be curious to see how David Stearns handles him because this is a ton of innings that he threw. I feel like he's going to be a great pitcher in the future with his arm angle and everything that came back from that. I personally think that the qualifying offer is the best way to go about that. And as much as I hate it as a player or a former player, the how that hurts their free agency. But Manaea being that $21 million 1 year, I think is a fair market value for him for a 1 year contract. That'd be very enticing for him to come back on that. And then you can negotiate off of that for, a multi-year deal kind of thing. I can see Manaea returning. Luis Severino, I don't see maybe returning quite as easily. I think there'll be a lot of suitors for what he brought to the plate, that kind of stuff. I guess I don't have we need that guy for next year, but I can see how pieces return. I think Quintana would be an easy one to come back, to be a fifth starter type. I think he likes it in New York. I think his work ethic, I think he fits well in an organization, as far as a veteran goes. I can see him coming back, but there really isn't one guy that I think needs to return.
Yeah, I like that you kind of veered towards the rotation at the end there because, there's three big pieces that the Mets will have to replace. I mean, they built a rotation from scratch last offseason. I have full belief that they can do it again. In fact, I think they can do it better because of some of the options that are going to be out there between Corbin Burns and Blake Snell, you say Kikuchi, Max Fried, Jack Flaherty. Those are all names that the Mets could bring in if they really wanted to. With that being said, I too think that Sean Manaea is kind of my biggest question mark because this is a guy that was expected to be a middle of the rotation guy this year and ended up becoming the ace of the team and thrived in that role. But if you incorporate his postseason innings, this was a 200 inning season for him, the first of his career. He's never done that in his 9 years as a big leaguer. It's not, wrong to question what he's going to look like next year, but he tugs on your heartstrings as a fan because he was the clubhouse guy. He had a thing with everyone between the face paint, uniform numbers, and, his just emotions pitching at Citi Field in the playoffs. An easy guy to endear yourself to, and I fully agree that they're going to probably use the qualifying offer on him because he's going to be a very desirable target for many, many teams. So I'm curious to see if he comes back and Seng is healthy and they add a big fish. Suddenly he is your three, and that's a really good three to have in your rotation compared to what you had last year. And for Jose Quintana, he fully won me back over, and that's a guy that's probably going to be operating on a 1 year deal considering how deep he is into his career. But again, David Stearns, he's not the kind of GM, in my opinion, that is going to be a let's get the band back together kind of guy. I know that he fully appreciates it. He was a Mets fan. I'm sure this is going to be a very difficult offseason for him. He's built relationships with a lot of these guys, but he's not that kind of GM. He never really has been. And I still trust him fully, but he's got a lot of work to do on the pitching side. For Iglesias and Winker, it's tough because I do fully agree. Like, if they do come back, they're going to be off the bench, and that makes your bench awesome, like a very talented bench like they had this year. But if I'm Winker and Iglesias too, I think I know deep down that somewhere else I can probably get an everyday starting gig, and I'm sure that's in their mind somewhere. So it is going to be a testament to how much they enjoyed being a part of the Mets organization and if that influences their decision or not. So with all that being said, I think we should probably turn the conversation over to the elephant in the room, or the polar bear in the room, if you will, which is Pete Alonso. And we have been talking about the Pete Alonso contract situation since March, because that was when we thought an extension would get done. It didn't, and this became a full-on contract year for him. A very odd one, but one that ended, I think, in the best way possible for Pete. I think he fully recuperated his value if he had lost any in the eyes of GMs. I think he's going to get that big boy deal he was looking for, and I think he earned it, especially with that postseason performance. And David Stearns, again, does not seem like the kind of guy that operates with his heart first rather than his brain. And a lot of the notions that go into re-signing Pete Alonso involve the heart, between home run records and retiring as a Met and being one of the longest tenured guys on the team, being a captain in the clubhouse, all that stuff. When you look at it more objectively of like, well, Pete's getting older, this was a down year for him in power and OPS and speed and all that stuff, it makes it a very interesting conundrum. So I guess I want to ask you, did Pete's postseason influence the way you feel about bringing him back, or are you still kind of steadfast in the way you felt before?
I still feel very fond of Pete Alonso, the player. I still value him highly. I don't know what they do. I don't know if they try to lock this guy up long term, to be honest. And I agree with you that David Stearns isn't a emotional kind of contract guy. I think he'll go about it in an interesting way. I think there's some thought of moving Vientos to first base and having him be comfortable over there. He's got an absolute cannon. I think he could be a plus defender at first base, especially with the ability to scoop, a bigger glove, not having to get the ball out. The arm could come into play in a lot of good ways with relays home, that kind of stuff. So I could see them sliding him over and trying to fill in third base versus try to fill in first base. But I don't know, honestly, if I would love to have Pete Alonso back. Obviously, I think if he gets a chance to stay in one uniform his whole career and rewrite all the Mets offensive, records, would be amazing. But this guy is one of the big free agents out there, and he's 30 years old. Well, the other options out there for first base, Paul Goldschmidt, 37, coming off a very subpar year. He's had a couple of, not Goldschmidt-like years, to be honest. You got Rizzo, who's 35 and looking older. Josh Bell, who has never really established himself as a true, first baseman, power hitter type. Christian Walker had an amazing year, but he's 33, going to be 34 next year. There's not a lot of huge options at first base. And to be honest, there's not huge at third base outside of Alex Bregman, who also had an interesting year. But I think for Pete, wherever he can go and get that big contract, I would hold zero grudge if it's not as a New York Met. And I wouldn't hold grudge on David Stearns' side if it's not in a Mets uniform. So I'm 50-50 there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, it's going to depend on what the final number ends up being. Like, if Pete takes a a deal that I would consider to be cheaper than his value, and it's not with us, I'm going to be upset because, if the Mets were able to negotiate that and do all the other things they want to do, I want them to seize that opportunity. But you're totally right. Like, Pete is corner infield number one on this free agent market, a market that's mostly centralized around pitching, which is really good for the Mets. But he played every game this year. He played all 162, and then he played all 13 postseason games. He didn't miss a single game. And that matters when you talk about a lot of these other options that are like older guys who probably need time management and maybe won't play first base every day, even if they can provide you that bat. Pete Alonso provides you all of it. And he's got that proven resume. So it's going to be a bidding war between, the Cubs could use a first baseman. The Yankees could probably use a first baseman. The Mariners, I'm sure, would love a big power bat in the middle of their lineup. Houston, obviously is an option there as well. There's a ton of suitors for a guy like Pete Alonso. So not only is it going to be not easy, it's going to be a very competitive market for Pete Alonso. Whereas, some of the starting pitching options, guys like Iglesias and Winker might be easier deals to negotiate. So Mets fans, I guess all I'm going to say without, making a prediction or speculation is just brace yourself, because in 2022, no matter how we feel about it now, you can make a compelling argument that the Edwin Diaz 5-year deal was an emotional decision of this guy had the trumpets. He lit the city on fire. He was electric. He earned the deal. But I do think giving a reliever that much money might have been an emotional decision. And you're seeing how it panned out now with Pete, with how much he means to the city and how much of a character he's become. There are emotions that can bleed into the decision making here. And I wonder what it's going to look like between Steve Cohen and David Stearns, because I think last year, Steve Cohen kind of gave him the keys and said, hey, man, build me a roster from scratch, essentially. And Stearns did it, and it worked really well. Does Steve meddle? I don't really think he will. I think you've seen the evidence of what Stearns can do on a tight payroll. Imagine what he can do with all the money in the world. The answer is probably going to be build something better than what we saw this year, which is really exciting. It just might not involve all the guys you've come to love. And that's just baseball, man. That's just sports management in a nutshell. And if this team is going to get over the hump and eventually win that World Series, you're going to have to put yourself in the best position possible, and that might mean saying goodbye to guys that have been here for a while. With all that being said, I still want Pete to be here if it's possible, because in my ideal scenario, Pete retires as a Met and sets the home run record. But Jerry, it's gonna be a busy offseason, man. I'm excited for it.
I am too, man. I think the biggest question mark is starting pitching.
Yeah.
I think that was the weakness coming in. I think the guys that they signed really stepped up. The loss of Singa was huge.
Yeah.
But to me, the rotation next year, I found it interesting in our show notes that you had Budo in the bullpen.
I did. And that's a great point.
Are you keeping Budo in the bullpen?
He looked great as a starter in April and May and June.
I think he's a starter. I that's how I feel. I think his value is highest. I think his value to the team is highest as a starting pitcher, and I think he's earned the right to do that. I don't want to see another, Seth Lugo opportunity where his success in the bullpen hampered his ability to start. Obviously, I think Jose Budo shown better than Seth Lugo did that he can have success in the rotation. So I have the rotation right now as being Senga, Budo, and Peterson as the three locks in that rotation. And then you fill it out with depth and move around outside of that. I would try personally to get a Corbin Burns, a Max Fried, maybe a Walker Buehler there to try to put an ace on top. Obviously I think that's the key for everybody, especially with the deep pockets that Steve Cohen has had and shown that he's not afraid to spend with all that money coming off the books. An older free agent just didn't work out in Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. And it's not like it was only in a Mets uniform, because those guys left and had similar production. So I could see them going after a younger guy and trying to, put him in a Mets uniform to be the ace of the future, a Zach Wheeler type moving forward.
High praise for Jose Budo. And fans, if you're listening and you're thinking about those home runs in Milwaukee and kind of shaky postseason appearances, don't forget how important Jose Budo was to this team's success a lot, especially when Daniel Nunez went down and he had to move to that setup role. He was integral to this bullpen success. And at one point, earlier in the year, he outdueled Cole Reagans. Like, that's a pretty substantial accomplishment for someone who was starting for the first time in the big leagues. But you're right. This rotation, while right now you can consider it a weak spot, I actually think it's in a good spot because, one, the market, all the names that we mentioned, and the money we have to spend, and two, if these 5 guys that are currently listed as your real rotation between Senga, Peterson, Blackburn, McGill, Lucchesi, if more than half those guys become depth options, great. Your starting pitching suddenly has become one of your biggest strengths on your roster rather than a massive question mark that it was heading into this season that obviously worked out. So I think barring a pretty intense pursuit of Juan Soto, which I'm still having trouble believing. Like, I know a lot of Mets fans are like, that's the plan, that's plan A. I'll believe it when I see it. I also didn't believe that we were going to go hard after Yamamoto, and then that happened, so I could be wrong. I think a lot of the aggressive spending is going to go towards this rotation, and I hope it includes some guys from last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't. For me, we have a whole offseason to do this. Corbin Burns is priority number 1 for me, between Stearns drafting him, their previous relationship in Milwaukee, and Burns, maybe seeing the run that the Mets went on compared to what the Orioles did in the postseason. I got to think a lot of things just make sense there. But we'll see. The Mets have a lot of decisions to make. I do think, much like the 2022 offseason, we're going to see stuff happen early. Like, after the World Series ends and once the markets open up and qualifying offers are extended, I think the Mets are going to get to work. And I think the month of November is going to be pretty exciting.
I agree. I think Corbin Burns is number 2 for me. I agree with most of those fans that Juan Soto has to be priority number 1. It's going to take a lot to get him out of a Yankees uniform with what he's done, but it's so rare to have a guy, and this is why they went after Yamamoto. He's so young. He's going to get better. That's what Yamamoto did for the Dodgers and on free agency. I would very much love Juan Soto to be in a Mets uniform. I think he's far and away the best player available by a lot. It's going to take a crazy amount of money to get this guy, but 26-year-old future Hall of Famers do not come to free agency. It just doesn't happen. He's target number 1. Because I don't see a scenario outside of injury where Juan Soto's value doesn't show up in his production. I just can't see it. He's too good of a hitter. He's too good of a player, and he's too young to have already peaked. He's done it in multiple markets. He's shown to be a winner. He steps up and plays solid defense when you need him to. To me, this guy is priority number 1.
All right, I wasn't going to do this, but since we're here, we might as well do it. What's the number you'd go to?
650.
I think it's going to take 7.
I
think he wants to get the money Ohtani got and maybe more. And
he doesn't pitch.
Yeah, but he's also Ted Williams.
That's true.
So I don't know. I think that's going to be a big discussion, man. Like, what team is willing to go that extra step and, change their future forever?
So I went on to Spot Track to look at free agents.
Their estimate was, I appreciate their model, but I think the estimate was like 515 or something. It's going to be more than that.
Because it's unprecedented, right? Yeah. I just sorted by youth, and Jose Devers, Rafael Devers' brother, I believe, is a minor league free agent. He's 24.8 years old. Then it's Juan Soto at 25.9. That's
so ridiculous.
And then Christian Pache, Humberto Castellanos, Estevan Florial. Like, these are minor league guys with a future Hall of Famer at the second youngest unrestricted free agent. It's truly so rare to have a guy like that. This is the target for me. I would do almost anything as far as the numbers wise to get this guy in a Mets uniform.
And I'm not saying that this would stop me. The only thing that does kind of make me sad about it is if you signed Juan Soto, and great, you signed Juan Soto. There's no role for Jesse Winker on this team.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. That, not that it would ever stop them, but I love Jesse Winker, so
He
it'd be a
could
bummer.
still be on the team with Juan Soto, by the way.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I guess why wouldn't he want to be? But whatever.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's going to be a bench piece anyway, sitting behind Juan Soto. That's a pretty good one.
Jerry, this offseason is going to take years off my life.
It's going to be fun. We'll be covering it.
Yes, we will. Guys, thank you so much for a wonderful 2024 season. I think that's all we got for our little recap here and offseason preview. Like Jerry said, a lot more to come. Stay with us. We're going to be taking a little break because there's not going to be too much to talk about, but we love you.
Correct. Thank you guys for an amazing season following along. Thank you to this Mets team for an incredible year to be able to talk about and watch and follow along. This was truly a very special season, one that I won't ever forget. So many fun storylines, so many fun player performances. This was a fun one, and I'm already nostalgic about it, but so much more looking forward to what the New York Mets have in store for us in years to come.
That window's opening, baby. It's cracking open. We'll see you guys soon. LFGM.
LFGM. Actually, I'm going to just LGM that.
Keep it PC.
I don't want Keith to get mad.
Jerry and Charlie, Shade Station.